We were supposed to be recording 7 minutes ago, and Zach is still not here. He's apparently making himself a cold drink.
The Division III basketball season rolls along, and so does the D3 Datacast. Back for another week on this show. Matt, I think this is your favorite week of the year. Is that true?
Sure.
Because this is the week that I get on this show and try to make a big deal about your birthday. Have everyone wish Matt a very happy birthday, a very special one as an extra digit on the odometer rolls along. And Matt, you probably thought that we were past the days where you had to worry about receiving hand-me-downs from me. But I want to make an extra special just presentation on this week's show and let you know that, no, there is something that I have at this point outgrown, but, will be just the right size for you. So next time I see you, you'll be able to be presented, with this nice coffee mug. So that means you need to figure out which two you're going to be removing from your mug collection at home so that you can bring home this beauty.
Sounds great.
Should we talk about some Division III basketball, or you want to just talk more about your birthday?
Let's do it. In the North, I'm going to talk about the CCIW race, which is exactly what we thought it was going to be when the season started. Carthage and Illinois Wesleyan tied at 8-3. The Carthage Firebirds got a road win over the Titans of Illinois Wesleyan on Wednesday. They split the season series now. The road team won both games. And so, yeah, the two preseason favorites are a game and a half clear of Elmhurst. Elmhurst and Wheaton are both 6-4. Tons of difficult games remain in the CCIW. It feels like both Illinois Wesleyan and Carthage are maybe destined to lose at least one more game, but I think avoiding that second loss is going to be a really, really big deal. Sometimes we get toward the middle of the season, the end of the season, things shift all around, but here we are, CCIW race at least exactly what we thought it was going to be. It's going to be a good one. Carthage and Illinois Wesleyan, the two teams we thought they were on the top, they are indeed on top right now. Again, difficult league. It'll be interesting to see. Can someone get unscathed? I think probably both one losses for both teams. Someone get two, that might put them in trouble. So we'll have to see what the CCIW has in store down the stretch.
It sure seems like everyone in the CCIW is playing really hard, having a lot of fun. Yeah. So your outlook on the conference there seems to be playing out for sure. Matt, my play here in the North, I feel like I need to follow up on last week's 4-point play, in which I talked about Rose-Hulman. They had a little bit of a lead ahead of a chase pack there in the HCAC. But with what happened this past week, I feel like we need to kind of revisit that. As the Fighting Engineers went 0-2 this past week with losses to Franklin and Transylvania, both home games, and combine those results with other conference results means that chase pack that I talked about last week is now the lead pack. You have Rose-Hulman, Franklin, Transylvania, Anderson, Mount St. Joseph in a 5-way tie for first place there at 9-4, with Hanover just one back at 8-5. At 9-4, that's 13 games played there in the HCAC. They're nearly 3/4 of the way through league play, and there is absolutely zero clarity as to what's going on with that 5-way tie. This has to be one of the craziest conference races, not just in Division III basketball, but just in college basketball at any level.
In some ways, it feels like a microcosm of the top 25, which we'll get to in a little bit. Just like everyone wins, everyone loses. Is anyone good? Is everyone good? Let's just draw names and see who we think the best couple of teams are this week. That's kind of how it feels right now. HCAC is maybe a mini example of that. Everyone's just kind of jumbled up there.
So what names are you picking in the East, Matt, as we shift our focus around the compass dial there?
Yeah, Zach, let's talk about the GNAC out East. St. Joseph, Connecticut is 7-0. St. Joseph's, Maine is 6-0, both undefeated. Obviously, they're in conference play. They only play each other once this season. I think the GNAC is doing it a single round robin. That game's the last game of the regular season. St. Joseph's, Maine just beat Albertus Magnus on Saturday. That was Albertus's first and only loss of the conference season so far. And St. Joseph, Connecticut is going to have to play Albertus on Tuesday. If St. Joseph, Connecticut can clear that Albertus Magnus hurdle, maybe it might be setting up a kind of a clear path for these two teams then to meet in the final game of the season. Still several games to go, but that would be really fun. St. Joseph's, Maine, St. Joseph, Connecticut, maybe colliding down the stretch for a first place battle. That could be the championship decider on the last game of the season. We'll have to see how it goes. But St. Joseph, Connecticut, St. Joseph, Maine, right there on top of the GNAC. So far, they're both undefeated in conference.
Well, if it comes to pass that big clash happens that last last week of the regular season. It's going to feel like a huge win for somebody. And then, oh, by the way, you got to turn around and
Yeah.
have conference tournament
Yeah.
time, right? So,
Yep.
uh, you know, no time to feel sorry for yourself if, you lose that game. No time to pat yourself on the back if you feel really good about that game. That's kind of an interesting dynamic. I feel like St. Joseph, Connecticut is a team that, maybe the computer rankings really like and maybe see as kind of a step ahead of the competitors there. But, that's kind of a different story than the standings there. Okay, so my play in the East is not so much something that caught my eye that happened over the past week, but something that caught my eye that is about to happen here coming up, and that is with Bates. They've been a team that the computer rankings have liked, has gotten some top 25 consideration, and they've been well positioned in NPI rankings. But it just kind of seems like they've been one of those teams that maybe the jury's been out a little bit still for much of the season. Had an opportunity there to maybe quiet some doubters, but then got absolutely throttled by Emory back in December. Um, but kind of still hanging around the picture. But it's this late in the season. I feel like there's a lot we still maybe don't quite know about Bates, whether they're truly contender or maybe pretender. But I think that changes this week. They've got a tough week coming up, a Friday, Sunday of at Trinity, Connecticut, and at Wesleyan, and that may finally tell us everything we need to know about Bates. And then going even further, they've got Con College and Tufts at home to finish up conference play. So it's really like uh, a conference schedule for them that skews difficult towards the end.
Yeah.
Um, that always it brings some interesting dynamics into how conference races play out. But we're going to know a lot more about Bates, I think, especially this week. In 0-2, and maybe any of the doubters can you know say that they were right. But I feel like with that kind of road game situation, even a 1-1, I think is going to speak well for Bates, and maybe even that kind of changes some things. But big week for the Bobcats coming up.
Yeah, feels like they haven't always played the most difficult schedule so far this season, but yeah, they're about to. It's going to get real challenging there for Bates coming up ahead.
All right, compass dial points south, Matt.
Yeah, let's go talk about the SAA. We have Trinity, Texas, and Rhodes, who both won on Sunday. That sets up a potentially decisive match coming up Friday between these two SAA leaders. Both Trinity and Rhodes have only the one loss in SAA play. The pair have opened up a 3-game lead over Barry in the loss column. Trinity's lone defeat was at Rhodes, I think about 2 weeks ago. Rhodes had dropped the game to Millsaps. But Barry was a team that had been the class of the SAA for the last several seasons. With Trinity's move into that conference this season, it looked like maybe we kind of wondered, would Trinity kind of automatically become the class of the SAA. But what about Rhodes? They really stepped it up big time this season. They're having a great year, a big step forward, kind of making this a really fun race. And maybe, again, another one of these games coming up that could potentially decide the conference. But it's also put the SAA in a position to maybe get an at-large bid this season. They've kind of been a one-bid league mostly lately. It's not for sure that they're going to get one this year, but Trinity and Rhodes are both kind of in that mix right now. Maybe one of them gets the Pool A and maybe one of them gets an at-large. We'll have to see how things play out.
Yeah, big time for Rhodes to get that first one against Trinity.
Yeah, right.
Right. So, yeah, they have to make the return trip to San Antonio, but they do it knowing they can't do any worse at this point than a season split with them, right? So that's big time for Rhodes. We'll see what it's not quite going in with house money trying to get the sweep, but that makes it a really really important game for Trinity, maybe even more so than Rhodes. So big one to keep an eye on, because I really think that's a race that's playing out maybe differently than anyone would have thought coming into the season. For my play in the South, I'm going to talk Virginia Wesleyan. Matt, they had a rough stretch in December into January, lost 3 in a row, which maybe can happen, especially when you're playing good teams. But one of those was really a completely non-competitive game against Mary Washington. Uh, I, I don't want to say I wrote Virginia Wesleyan off at that point, but I really kind of felt like maybe they were going to be a little bit more towards the middle of the pack in the ODAC as you were looking at some of the other ODAC contenders there. But as the calendar turns to February here, the Marlins find themselves in sole possession of first place in the ODAC. Wins this past week at Hampton-Sydney and over Guilford. They've moved to 8-1 in conference play, and like I said, they're by themselves for the time being at the top of the ODAC. That's not something that I saw coming. a month ago as they were kind of hitting that rough stretch. So big time stuff from the Marlins there. Uh, Randolph Macon has hit a few bumps, and I guess it looks like Virginia Wesleyan's one of those teams that has been able to take advantage and is the beneficiary of that. As you look at the schedule up ahead here for Virginia Wesleyan this week, not exactly murderer's row in the ODAC, but they do have, I believe, the continuation of that game that was suspended at Averett, a game they were trailing, and of course Averett, a team that we've already seen pop up and knock off some big boys there. So not going to be easy there, as that's kind of an extra game on top of a couple other ODAC games for Virginia Wesleyan if they are to hold on to the ODAC lead. But I will say that at this point in the season, I was not expecting them to be in sole possession of first place, yet they are. So well done by the Virginia Wesleyan Marlins.
Yeah, they took some lumps maybe a few weeks ago, but their team, the ODAC's tough, right? But they've also played a tough non-conference schedules. They've played a lot of good teams. They're tested. They've played, almost as tough of a schedule as anyone. So, yeah, kind of surprising where they were to maybe now be 8-1 in ODAC play. But again, they've played a lot of tough teams. So this type of schedule in the ODAC is maybe not that surprising for them.
All right, let's turn our attention west to finish up this week's 4-point play.
Yeah, Zach, Gustavus Adolphus had another 2-0 week in the MIAC. They're now 11-0, undefeated in league play. The Gusties had double digits wins over Hamlin and Concordia Moorhead this week. Now 5 games to play. They effectively hold a 3-game lead in the conference. St. Olaf sits at 9-2, but Gustavus has already beaten them in their one and only game that they'll play. They're 19-1, that is Gustavus on the season. They're getting, kind of close to wrapping up the MIAC title at this game, maybe 2 or 3 wins will for sure do it. They're also looking really good to be kind of a top 16 like team in the national tournament, maybe even a top 8 team. But we could be hosting in Gustavus at Gustavus Adolphus and the NCAA tournament. They could be hosting a pod there. Really great season for a team that we saw, razor thin margin from tournament inclusion last year, but now they're looking kind of like a no doubter this season. So really great things for Gustavus, and it looks like almost for sure that they're going to win the MIAC now this season.
Yeah, and you just keep seeing the Gusties win games, and I feel like to some degree I've been doing it quietly. We're talking top 25 every week, and we'll get onto that here shortly for this week's ballot. And yeah, they've been solidly in the middle there, kind of moving up a little bit in your ballot, but I just feel like maybe nationally this is a team that, even while they have been solidly top 25 right there, maybe they're still somehow a little bit underrated, right? Just because maybe it is because there's that one loss compared to like a Montclair State that hasn't suffered that one loss. But I feel like if you're talking Gustavus versus Montclair State, I don't know that there's a lot of difference there. And maybe I even prefer Gustavus Adolphus, right? They're just a team that continues to take care of business, and I think maybe doing so a little bit under the radar, and could be a team that, it sounds weird to say, surprises in the national tournament, but really shouldn't be a surprise at the same time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay, for my topic here in the West, Matt, let's go to Chapman, and they're a team that maybe nationally gets kind of lost in the mix of that middle of the SCIAC. That kind of, I think nationally we really look at it as kind of a Redlands versus CMS race. But Redlands suffered an early loss in conference play, and that was to Chapman, and so that kind of set up a situation where maybe Redlands would need a little bit of help, having lost that one, and in the head-to-head race with Claremont Mud Scripps, of course, Redlands gets the first game against CMS, but this week they also got a little help as CMS dropped a game, and wouldn't you know it, it was also to Chapman, right? So Chapman is in the kind of the, maybe you'd say the second tier or whatever that kind of mix is, maybe behind the conference leaders, but they've now got a win against Redlands and against Claremont Mud Scripps. So we'll see how it all shakes out, but certainly Chapman has had their say in how that race is playing out.
Yeah, for most of the season, it's kind of looked like just a two-team race there, but already Chapman has shown that they can beat both of those teams. So whether or not they can, be in the mix down the stretch, that the conference tournament looks like it could be really interesting there as well, because we've already seen in the SCIAC kind of not anyone capable of beating anyone, but any one of those kind of top teams can now beat each other, and that makes it really interesting.
Yeah, as you look forward to maybe a semifinal where one of those teams has to play a Chapman or an Occidental, another team
Right.
that we've talked about here a little bit, right? There's going to be some semifinals games there that are going to not be gimmies, right? This is not just a given that this is going to end up in a Redlands versus Claremont Mudscripts SCIAC tournament championship, right? So don't lose sight of that, because I feel like, especially with the West Coast, the later games, it's a little bit harder to maybe keep track of the dynamics going on there. But even if it does kind of turn out to be a two-team race, there are some other teams that are definitely going to be having a say in how that plays out.
Yeah.
So, Matt, as we take a shift here into our top 25 segment here, where we'll take a look at your ballot. Um, boy, I feel like if there was ever a week just to be able to kind of reset the picture, to almost not even really worry about exactly reacting directly to what happened the week before, this would be it. You kind of can take a little bit more of a holistic view, maybe in trying to just kind of reset your overall ballot. I kind of tease this on social media, and I know I've said this privately, but it feels like there's always four segments or four parts of a Division III basketball season. There's that part in the very early of the season where we don't know who's good. We're watching some of those early games, trying to figure out, who the good teams are, and then we get to a point where it just feels like, oh, I don't know, maybe everyone's good. And then there's the third phase, which it feels like over the last week we've entered, where you're like, I don't know, maybe no one's really good. But ultimately, we get that fourth phase, which is really a lot of fun, where we get a great tournament, and no one ends up really caring what the reactions or opinions were during those first three phases. So it kind of feels like we're there now. We've seen, Trinity, Connecticut take a loss, and then Emory becomes number one, and then they have an 0 for 2 UAA weekend, and there's just other losses and other churn going on in the top 25. Matt, it feels like we've entered that, I don't know, maybe no one's any good
Yeah.
week. So how, with all that's taken place over this past week since we talked about last week's ballot, how are you approaching putting together a ballot for this week?
Yeah, had a lot of top 25 losses. I just kind of try to keep going back to what is my goal. I'm trying to figure out who I think would win if they played this week, kind of on a neutral court. And for me, I still landed on Trinity, Connecticut. I know they've taken now 2 losses 2 weeks in a row, but both their losses, it was at Wesleyan and at Tufts. Those are both, in my mind, like top 15 type teams. They're road losses by like 2 and 6 points or something like that. At this point in the season, basically everyone has losses like that. So I still believe Trinity, Connecticut is good. I don't think that they're as separated from the rest of the country like we thought 2 or 3 weeks ago. But I still think they're in the mix, right? But it's now I think like a group of maybe, let's say, 5 or 6 or something like that at the top. Whereas instead of just Trinity above everyone else, I think Trinity and Mary Washington and Chicago, I think I had a really big decision between those 3 this week. And maybe Randolph-Macon was in that mix as well. At Emory at 5, like, look, they're not far behind either, despite despite losses this weekend, right? But again, that's the time of the season we're in. We're in conference play. A lot of teams are kind of making that turn or have made that turn into the second time through the conference. A lot of losses through this top 25. I think we're at the point now where there's really we've said at different times this season, like 10 or 15 through 30. We're almost at the point where 1 through 30. There's not a whole lot of separation. We're going to get to the national tournament. There's going to be a whole bunch of teams who could get to that final 8 that's going to be in Fort Wayne this season. It would take a lot to surprise me if you read off a combination of 8 teams. Like if I went into a coma tomorrow and I woke up on the Thursday of Fort Wayne and you're like, hey, Matt, here's the 8 teams we're going to see today. You could just be drawing names for all I care right now. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. Let's see, anything interesting in my top 25 here. Montclair State, they're the undefeated. I have them at 7, which is they still keep moving up as other teams kind of take losses around them. I'm still not convinced, right? They're not my number 1 just because they're the only undefeated team. I have 2 lost teams ahead of them. I think they're good. I've said that for a few weeks now. I don't know that they're the best team. Are they a team that could get to Fort Wayne? For sure, right? So nothing would really surprise me there.
Well, 8 teams are going to Fort Wayne, and you've got them number 7.
I've got them at 7.
Right?
So
it's
yeah,
not,
they're a favorite. I just, I'd like to see them play a little bit more quality.
And you said you could go in a coma and not be surprised with who came out as the 8 in Fort Wayne. And I'll say this too: whatever 8 end up going to Fort Wayne, any of the 8 could win a national
Yeah,
championship.
I
I'm
think
convinced
so.
of that. I don't
Yeah.
think anyone's going to get there where you think, I couldn't really see that team. Either because, um, because of we're sitting right here now and wouldn't be surprised, or because of what they would have had to have gotten through in those first 3 games that really earns that way into that final 8. I think at that point you'd have to say they're a national championship contender.
Yeah.
Right? We're going to see 8 teams playing in Fort Wayne. Any of them are going to be able to win it all.
Yeah. Yep. And again, not super related to my top 25 here, but there could be teams that they will lose their conference semifinal and be an afterthought, never thought of again. That if they then won the semifinal and final, got into the national tournament, are good enough to be like a Sweet 16 or Elite 8 type of a team, or at least good enough to get those type of results. So we're gonna get some craziness. And speaking of the craziness we could see, like I have 4 UW teams, 22, 23, 24, and 25. I think they're all good. You could even throw UW Platteville, who's probably like in that next 5 off my ballot. All those teams, there's probably 5 WIAC teams good enough to get to Fort Wayne for one of those kind of Elite 8 spots. Also, none of them could get there, right? They're all not strong enough that they could lose in their opening round pod. So that's an interesting conference. I think no elite teams there, but I think 5 pretty good ones could beat anyone in the country or could lose to anyone in the country. That's the top.
Okay,
25,
so
yeah.
yeah, so okay, so you gave us a top 20 or top 21, and then you punted, just putting a block of WIAC schools there. Just kind of gray that out and say WIAC to be figured out, plus maybe a team or two to be determined. But Matt, anything this week that you feel like someone might look at your ballot, and if you're looking just past week's results, maybe doesn't line up necessarily, and maybe it's Trinity at number 1, but like, sometimes people overreact to, this is what the top 25 was. This is what we saw just this past week. So therefore, this can't happen in this next poll or ballot, or shouldn't happen, right? It's kind of that mix of reacting to what we learned over the past week, maybe not overreacting, but considering that within context of the greater season. And also at the same time, this is an opinion poll. It's, if you want standings, go look at standings, right? And so and that's maybe kind of the Montclair State argument. No one is denying the undefeated record, and you got to give them credit, because every time you step on a court, you put yourself at risk of taking a loss, and they haven't done that yet, right? So to some extent, they deserve a ton of credit for that. Of course, with the strength of schedule, you're maybe put yourself at more or less risk on any given day that you step on the court, right? So anything there that even maybe you struggled with in terms of like just kind of putting this ballot together compared to a ballot from a week ago?
I didn't count exactly, but there was something like 15 teams or something in my top 25 last week that suffered a loss. Might have been even more than that. I'm not sure. So there was a lot of losses all in and around everything. So it makes it a little bit difficult to figure out exactly what order they need to be in this week. But again, trying to start over and just say, like, who are my good teams? So in some ways, there are some positions that changed quite a bit, but there are some teams that kind of stuck kind of where they were. In a lot of ways, though, I wish I had a top 35, because there are other teams that I would like to continue voting for. Like, I was really looking to try to get, I mentioned UW Platteville, like they could be kind of in a mix there. There's like Maryville, they could be in a mix here. Carthage could be in a mix here. Teams like that that feel like they are deserving to be among these types of teams on the screen right now, but I just kind of ran out of spots for. And it feels like we're at a position where, again, like all these teams are kind of squished towards the middle. It's not like we have really that big of an upper echelon and then like a back half. It's just like I said, like 35 good teams.
And that kind of struggle is why it's so great that the full poll is based on 25 different voters,
Yeah.
right? So you have certain things that you wish that you could have done this or that, but instead did something else. But ultimately, you're 4% of the overall poll, and so it's great to get all those different opinions and put them all together and see how it all shakes out with everyone added to the mix there. So always fun to see individual ballots, and then how that translates into the full poll on a weekly basis. All right, so Matt, let's leave the top 25 talk there as we move into our main show topic here, talking about where some of these at-large bids could come from. Of course, we've been running the Sims, got the bubble watch up there at D3Datacast.com, and just more and more attention, I think, is going to be coming to those those types of projections and those a lot of fans looking for those outlooks of ultimately who's going to be in or who's going to be out. And we've got a few weeks left here, Matt. So maybe not time to talk necessarily about individual teams, but starting to hone in maybe a little bit more about at least where those at-large bids might come from in terms of conferences.
Yeah, so we're looking at Sunday's simulations here, 1,000 simulations of the rest of the season, which teams ended up getting into the tournament. Here are conferences, I think it's 18, that in no simulations did they ever end up getting an at-large bid on Sunday. The AEC, the AMCC, the CCS, the Cognac, the Empire 8, the HCAC, the Little East, the MAC Freedom, the MASCAC, the MIAA, the Midwest Conference, the NAC, the Northern Athletics Conference, the President's Athletics Conference, the SLIAC, the UEC, the UMAC, and the USA South. These teams only ever got their AQ in. Everyone in these conferences is playing for their conference tournament championship because that's probably the only way that they can get in. Like, maybe things shift enough that one of these starts getting a sliver of hope, but really these conferences are all looking at not who can make it in as an at-large, but really we're just getting the champion, and that's it. So got to win your championship if you're in one of these conferences.
And a few of these conferences really stand out as some of the really great conference races that we've talked about over the course of the season here and even in this episode so far. But um, for other conferences or other teams that maybe do have some at-large hope, and are going to be really paying attention to that bubble situation, for them, these conferences you can look at, and it really doesn't matter who wins, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to have that team that if they don't win it, that could take a bid away from someone else, right? Being an AQ only, right? You can kind of watch these as a bubble team and just sit back and enjoy some of these great games, great conference tournaments that are going to take place, because being single bid only, whoever wins it is going to get in. Whoever loses it is at this point in based on the simulations not going to get in, right? So these are not going to be your bid thief type scenarios, situations to look at.
All right, so our next group of teams we're calling So You're Telling Me There's a Chance. And these conferences showed up in some simulations, but really not to the level that any teams or programs or coaches are going to feel very comfortable with. So like the Skyline, one time out of 1,000, they received an at-large bid. No Max fans, that was not Yeshiva. That was Farmingdale State, one time out of 1,000 was a at-large bid. Pool C. The SUNYAC, 4 times in 1,000 sims, they received a bid. The Northwest Conference, 4 times in 1,000 sims. And the Liberty League, 5 times in 1,000 sims, they received an at-large bid. For all intents and purposes at this point, it looks like these are probably AQ-only conferences. If we have like no bid thieves, and if there's a team, maybe the top team in all these conferences, if they run the table to their conference final, there might be some scenarios in which they could sneak in, but it's like, even at this point, you're going to be sweating it out on the final day. So probably one bid only conferences, but crazy things happen in sports, and these could be one of the crazy things happen type conferences that maybe find their way in an at-large bid situation.
And probably in these situations, in these simulations or handful of simulations where they happened, it was probably one that coincided with like no bid thieves happening at all, right?
Yeah.
And I got to imagine in that one bid in which the Skyline got an at-large bid via Farmingdale State, I got to imagine that would be okay with Max fans, because I'm guessing that was a simulation in which Yeshiva won the Pool A, right? So I think they would be okay with that one.
Almost certainly.
I can't imagine that was in a simulation, a scenario where Farmingdale State lost
to a
Skyline championship game to someone else and then still got in, right?
Yeah. All right, so the next group of teams we're calling probably still just the AQ, but now we're getting actual percentage chances that there is an at-large team. So like the American Southwest Conference, if Mary Hardin Baylor in simulations in which they did not win the AQ, 28% of the time, so that's still a fair chance, 28% of the time they did get an at-large bid. So they're probably like, if you win all the rest of their games, they only have like 5 left or something like that, up to the tournament and lose the final, then maybe you're looking like you're getting in a good position. In the North Coast, if you add up I think most of this was John Carroll, but then some Dennison, some DePaul, they all added up to about 15% of the points of the time. If those individual teams did not win, then they had some shot at getting an at-large bid into the tournament. In the GNAC, we talked about St. Joseph, Connecticut. They might have like a win out and potentially be in type of a situation. They were showing up maybe about 6% of the time in which they did not win their conference tournament. And then in the American Rivers, it was like 1% Dubuque and like 0.5% Loras was maybe showing up some of the time in at-large bid situations, but probably these conferences are one bid only. There's some scenarios, and of these, the only individual school that feels maybe any good about this is Mary Hardin Baylor, up at about a quarter of the time. Otherwise, it's kind of thin margins here for these teams. They're still hanging around on the Bubble Watch page, maybe, but just not very high there.
And you mentioned it with St. Joseph, Connecticut. It's like maybe a win out until a conference tournament championship game situation, right? And that's really what these lower numbers come down to, is there's maybe a path there, but it's a very narrow path, and maybe those teams have already used up whatever margin for error they would have had with taking the number of losses. Like, they've kind of used up that margin for error already, and so it's more about walking that very narrow path of winning out through whatever they need to get to that, right? And then
hoping for few bid thieves and also bubble teams around you to kind of lose too. So
right.
you're maybe also hoping for help.
Right. Yeah. So it's like the very, very small chances are probably needing a lot of help. But as you start to get up a little bit higher, maybe it is a little bit more in your control. But again, it's walking that very narrow path.
Yep. All right, so 2 conferences here that we're kind of just calling bid thief only. So in the MIAC, when Gustavus didn't win the MIAC tournament, they were in every single time. Every simulation in which they didn't win, they won. But there's also no other viable team in the MIAC. So if Gustavus wins, that's a 1-bid league. If Gustavus doesn't win, that's pretty much automatically a 2-bid league. Pretty similar in the Conference of New England. Endicott was showing up 98% of the time in which they did not win their AQ. So it's almost a for sure thing that they're going to get in as well, kind of like Gustavus. But if they get in, it's probably just, if they win the AQ, it's probably just Endicott. Maybe like Western New England was showing up 1% of the time, but that's probably another one of those like 0 bid thief type situations where Endicott won and Western New England won or lost the final against them, and they had won all their other games and there was no bid thieves. That's probably that kind of a situation. So CNE and MIAC, probably just the 1 bid unless they lose, and then it's kind of an automatic bid thief conference right there. All right, our next group we're calling possible multi-bids. So these conferences have probably one strong candidate and then another team who's kind of at or near double-digit percentages. So the SAA, we talked about them in the 4-point play. Trinity, Texas right now looking good in simulations where they did not win the SAA tournament. 95% of the time they still got in via an at-large bid. Rhodes is showing up there as well at 9%. So we could get scenarios where Trinity wins and Rhodes gets an at-large, or Rhodes wins and Trinity gets an at-large. This could be 2 bids. There, Rhodes is kind of on the fringe there at only 9%. They're probably not feeling great. They're probably in win the tournament mode, but there are some chances there. In the NJAC, Montclair State is almost 100% getting in, and TCNJ is kind of on there on the fringe at 12% as well. Pretty similar situation in the SCAC. And also this was, I think I adjusted for Sunday on this because these 2 teams played head-to-head and St. Thomas won. So I think Concordia, Texas was about 25%. This is kind of a halfway estimate that I'm picking at 15% there that they can still get in regardless of that loss. I think they still play again, and that's going to be a big game for Concordia's at-large chances. And then the MAC Commonwealth, this is a getting close to a kind of a 1.5 bid situation. Hood looks very strong. Should they not win that tournament? And York, PA is sitting there at 35%. So if York can kind of win out until the tournament, I think that they would increase their odds there pretty well. So these are kind of possible fringe multi-bid conferences here.
And now we're getting into the territory where if you're looking at this from the perspective of a rooting guide for another bubble team, yes, these are possible multi-bid, but you definitely have a preference for who wins the automatic qualifier. If you're a bubble team, you definitely still want to see Montclair State win the NJAC and then, take your chances on the bubble against a TCNJ rather than have TCNJ take that AQ. And then, that's going to be an at-large bid that just gets gobbled up by Montclair State. that is, that's going to be harder for a bubble team to compete with, so
Yeah.
to speak, right? So there's still a definite preference for bubble teams as to who they want to see win here, even though these conferences are setting up where possibly, they're going to get a couple teams in anyway.
Yeah, these are still leagues that could end up in bid thief scenarios, right? If TCNJ wins, even though they're showing up with some odds, it could be that they were above, that they knocked out a at large team, right? So this could be a bid thief situation here for these conferences still. So if you're a bubble team, you're right, Zach. You really want these favorites to win those conference tournaments.
Yeah, unless we're starting to see, as we get into some of the other slides where we're starting to see a couple teams that have
Yeah.
really high odds, then you can say maybe this team or this team, right? But in general, you always want that to be going to, whoever the team most likely to take away an at-large bid would be.
So now let's go to those other leagues, Zach. These are probably multi-bid leagues, so we're getting a pretty good chance that we will get probably two, or maybe more of these conferences. Not all of them will end up multi-bid, but we're getting some good odds here. Mount Union looking at 99%, and then Otterbein at 65%. So pretty good chances that we're getting two from the OAC. Our simulations averaged 1.9 total bids from the OAC. Not quite two, but almost there. In the CCIW, we mentioned Illinois Wesleyan and Carthage, that conference race coming down to those two teams, but Elmhurst is still on the fringes there. 1.93 bids from the CCIW overall, so almost two bids. Looking at Carthage and Elmhurst, probably time to talk about maybe we're looking at Carthage or Elmhurst, not Carthage and Elmhurst. I don't completely have the data to see how many times did we get three CCIW teams, if at all, into the tournament. But it could set up a situation, or a potential situation, right, where Carthage and Elmhurst maybe play a semifinal where the winner is probably in via at large and the loser is out. Definitely still one bid scenarios in play for the CCIW, especially those that involve Illinois Wesleyan winning the conference tournament. But there are definitely some at large. About half the time at least, one of those two teams gets an at large, even if Illinois Wesleyan wins it.
Well, someone other than Illinois Wesleyan winning the CCIW is the clearest path to the CCIW.
That's an automatic two bid, essentially.
Yeah, automatic
right?
two bid.
Landmark, there's three teams. I think Viable Catholic at 91%. I don't know why they are not yellow there. Scranton at 78%, and Drew still at 20%. Again, probably Scranton or Drew, and we're getting pretty close to. I mean, not guaranteed two bids there from the Landmark, but you're getting fairly close to that, 1.95 bids. Although if Drew wins the whole thing, are there scenarios where Scranton and Catholic both make it? Probably we're getting to that point there. The NUMAC, WPI, and Babson are both about 81% of getting at-large bids should they not win the NUMAC tournament. Salve has about 3%, so not very strong there. But there's a chance that maybe they're at-large bid if one of Babson or WPI gets in, maybe all three as well. 1.96 bids from the NUMAC overall. And then our other last conference in this group is the Centennial. Franklin and Marshall, 81%. Johns Hopkins, 77%. 1.97, almost for sure two bids out of the Centennial Conference. If you get down to a conference final between these two teams and they've both played well down the stretch, you're probably looking at both in at this point. So you don't want to take extra losses if you're Franklin and Marshall or Johns Hopkins. But if they can avoid those, then the Centennial looks like it could be a two-bid league.
Mm-hmm. And starting to talk about the Landmark, NUMAC, and Centennial as bid thief conferences, if a third team wins those, like a non-Catholic or Scranton or someone other than WPI or Babson, which look at the way the NUMAC has gone, that could certainly happen, right? And then you're talking about exactly. Then you're maybe talking about the NUMAC as a three-bid league, and then look at those odds for Franklin and Marshall and Johns Hopkins. Someone other than that, maybe Ursinus makes a run, or something else happens, then you could be talking about the Centennial making a three-bid run, right? So these are the kinds of things, if you're a fan on the bubble, to start to think about in terms of who maybe you want to see win, or at least would prefer to see win.
Yeah. All right. These are, quote, definitely, not quite definitely, but almost definitely multi-bid conferences here. The Coast to Coast Conference, in every situation or every simulation, both Mary Washington and Christopher Newport got in. I think we're not talking lose out scenarios for these teams, but in no scenario did that happen. So they always both got in the R1000 simulations on Sunday. In the SCIAC, we talked about Redlands and Claremont Mudscripts. They both look 94% or above, a couple percentage points for Occidental. But if Redlands or CMS wins that conference tournament, they're both probably getting in. If someone else, like the Chapman, right, if they win that, then maybe we're getting 3 bids out of the SCIAC. In the ODAC, Randolph-Macon and Roanoke both look like they're almost locks right now. Virginia Wesleyan hanging in at 30% at large chances. But again, like, could a Hampton-Sydney make a run? Like, sure, like that could happen. The ODAC's deep enough. Washington and Lee, right, has beaten some teams. But we're almost definitely getting at least 2 teams in from that group. The WIAC is an interesting case here. We've got Stevens Point, La Crosse, Oshkosh, Whitewater, Platteville, all 65% or above, a couple percentage points from Eau Claire. But we have 5 teams that are more than 50% getting an at-large bid. However, the average from the WIAC was 4.1 bids. So there were 5 bid scenarios from the WIAC, but more likely 4. And it's probably an or situation, right? One of these teams is going to, you can't have 6 teams winning in an 8-team league every night. So maybe one of these teams takes too many losses. Maybe it's a Whitewater or a Platteville or an Oshkosh. Someone starts losing their percentage points to the other teams. I think in all likelihood, you'll see 4 WIAC teams, but I think 5 is in play. But I think it's just interesting to note, even though there's 5 above 50%, 4.1 was the number. Probably someone gives up their percentages, and it's kind of like an or, like 4 out of 5 get in, and the other one's left out. The NESCAC might be somewhat similar. Trinity's almost assuredly in. Tufts assuredly in. Wesleyan assuredly in. Bates, we mentioned Bates kind of being a computer darling, an NPI darling, 75% still. I think Amherst is still on the prowl at 66%. And then Conn College, Colby in the teens, and Bowdoin at 1%. 4.79 average bids from the NESCAC on our Sunday simulations. Very real chance for 5. I think I would have to think 4 is maybe, but 4.79, it maybe looks like 5 is likely. That could be 4 or 5, which does make bracketing challenging in the Northeast. But will be fascinating to see what happens down the stretch. If you're a bubble team fan, you would like to see Conn College and Colby and Amherst take as many losses as possible. You want to see those favorites win games and try to take fewer teams from the NESCAC on the bubble. But right now they're looking strong. Maybe 5 bids from the NESCAC, depending on how things break.
So that leaves one conference yet to talk about, Matt, the one conference without a conference tournament. So we don't need to worry about any conference tournament craziness coming out. But another league that will certainly be a multi-bid league, and that's the UAA. It's just a kind of the way that things look right now. It's just a matter of, is it going to be 4? Is it going to be 5? Kind of the average sitting in the 4.5 range over the course of 1,000 sims.
Yeah, and those teams, right? Chicago, Emory, Wash U, all looking very strong. I'm pulling up my conference list here because I did not have that on my page. So
NYU would be the fourth highest, followed by Brandeis at 64.7%.
Yeah, and I think I had a lot of questions from UAA fans. Of course, they had Sunday games. What do we need to do down the stretch to get in? And for, I think, Wash U and Brandeis, the answer was go 4-3. And you're probably in. 3 and 4, you're maybe looking a little bit dicey, but we'll have to see how that goes. But I think the UAA is trending maybe more towards 5 than 4. But yeah, as of Sunday, they were right at 4.5. And I can get you those percentages right now. Emory and Chicago were both 100%. Wash U was at 97%. And NYU was at about 80%. And Brandeis was at about 65%. Carnegie Mellon hanging in at about 8%. These were before Sunday's games were reflected. So we'll change a little bit. But I think to me, I wouldn't be surprised if the UAA trends a little bit more like the NESCAC, more toward 5 teams rather than just 4. And I think 4 is a lock, right, from the UAA.
Yeah, it certainly looks like it right now, especially after that big weekend a week ago that NYU had, right? Yeah. That kind of really put them back in position to be a major player here. So again, I always like talking kind of the rooting guide for other bubble teams as you're looking at UAA play. Big Rochester fans, big Case Western Reserve fans, right? And even Carnegie Mellon, who's still showing up with, coming into play Sunday, 7.5% odds for an at-large if they need it. But hey, it probably can't hurt to have a Carnegie Mellon knock off a Brandeis, right? So if you're a pretty solid bubble team, it probably only helps you to have Brandeis look more bubbly than it would necessarily hurt you to have Carnegie Mellon working themselves more into the bubble picture there.
Yep.
Okay. So of course we got to say this is a snapshot in time. You say as you said that these are based on 1,000 simulations that we run daily coming in to play Sunday. That's run every day. You can go to d3datacast.com, go under the NPI drop down at the top. You can find men's and women's basketball NPI. Those are the NPI rankings that we run based on all the games to date, right? And then we have another page for men's basketball projections, women's basketball projections. That's where you can find, the results to date plus our computer simulation for the rest of the season, right? So it's a combination of what's been played and then what's being simulated based on playing out those games yet to be played 1,000 times with the D3 Datacast efficiency team ratings kind of serving as giving some informed information into those matchups and into how those games might be able to play out, right? So as you look at how things change from here, it's really kind of twofold, where we've got games that were as games are played, they turn into results, and right, and that turns into a possible win, possible loss, into an actual win or an actual loss. But also the computer rankings are adjusting after each game. So yeah, you might win, but if you did so in a fashion that was a little bit less impressive than what the computer was expecting, that might have a damaging effect on kind of how the computer looks at you going forward, right? So it's kind of this shifting picture based on not only NPI, but on those team efficiency ratings.
Yep, exactly.
Going to be fun to watch this continue to play out. I think we learned a lot watching it play out for the first time last year, and looking forward to seeing it play out again this year with NPI. So let's go on to the picks, though, Matt, for this week. Let's go with Washington Jefferson was a 1-point favorite at Chatham. Chatham picks up the big PAC win there, 84-72. Neither of us get that. We both liked Washington Jefferson as road favorites, but Chatham gets the win, and so we miss out on that point. Southern Maine was 105-63 winners over UMass Boston. And we've got a very good excuse for missing this one badly, Matt, because right. We accidentally put this one in the picks. It went in there wrong. We had this in there as a game at UMass Boston, so we were clearly not thinking about this game correctly, and that completely explains how we missed on this pick. Yeah. This game was actually at Southern Maine. They get the big win, and neither of us pick up a point there.
That would have been about a 42-point switch around if we had gotten that location correct. Yeah.
Yes, completely explained by the fact that we totally messed up on the location of that game for the pick slate. All right, we didn't mess up on the location, Matt, but we still messed up on the pick. Carthage was at Illinois Wesleyan, big time CCIW road win for Carthage, an 80-65 score there. We were both on the Illinois Wesleyan side, and the 3.5 point underdogs got the win outright. However, 3.5 point underdog Mount Union went on the road at Otterbein and came away with a win. We were both taking the points, get the outright win with Mount Union, 74-69, big time OAC win there for the Purple Raiders. And in the D3 Datacast game of the week, the Chicago Maroons used a huge second half to knock off Emory in a big UAA tilt, 74-64, the final there. Chicago was a half-point favorite on the computer line. I went with the Maroons correctly. Matt, that was another loss for you. Rough week for you. I went 2-3 to move to 31-2, perfectly 500 on the year. Matt, you were 1-4, dropped to a still impressive 39-23-2.
There, I just got the corrected slide scores on the screen. Yep, we're good. All right, I have been, I think as the kids say, selling the last couple of weeks, so I need to start having a big week. And get my scores back in the right direction. I'm still got a good lead, but man, I've had a couple of stinkers. All right, so Zach, this week's picks. First game, it's the Whit game out in the Northwest Conference. Whitman at Whitworth. This is the biggest line I can remember in this rivalry in a long time. 21 points in favor of Whitworth. Zach, how would you pick this one?
I am going to lay the big number. Whitworth to cover the 21 points. It was a 30-point game the first time these teams met.
Yeah.
But it's big. It's a rivalry game. But you know what? Whitworth also took a Northwest Conference loss this past week, and having already beaten Whitman by 30, I can't imagine they're going to be trying to mess around. So
Yeah.
this is going to be a fun one to watch as I'm looking for Whitworth to cover
Man, I would
21.
I would never I would never pick against the 21-point line. I'm going to go with Whitman, and I don't even care who the two teams are. 21 is just too big. Um, all right, Zach, our next game is another conference game with a big line. Bates at Trinity. This is a 20-point computer line in favor of Trinity. How would you pick this one?
Yeah, this is another one that's kind of a shocking number. So I will be swayed by the number here and go with Bates, especially with Trinity looking vulnerable, right? I mean, this is the computer's been looking at Trinity all season. This is the season's worth of information here. I'm not sure that Trinity's playing quite at that level as they have for the whole year. So give me Bates.
Zach, I just said I would never pick against a 21-point line, but I will pick against a 20-point line. I'm going to take Trinity. They're still my number one team. The computer still does like Bates as like a number 29 type of team or something in that range, right? Or at
That's
least
been
it did on
falling though.
Sunday. It did on Sunday. I think Trinity's going to be a little mad. I think they're going to be reasserting themselves. I think that they win massively in this game. We'll have to see how that one goes. All right, game number 3, Rhodes at Trinity. Again, we mentioned this in the 4-point play coming up. 4.5 line favoring the home team, Trinity. How would you pick this one?
I'm going to go with the home team Trinity here, Matt. I didn't do it on the other pick, but I will with this one. Yeah, I mean 4.5 is not a huge number
Yep.
for a home team. Important game like this, I think the place will be juiced. Give me the Tigers.
Yeah, you're kind of talking like home court advantage plus a bucket or so. I like that for Trinity. I'm going to take them. I think that they can win this game by a couple of possessions, cover that 4.5 points. So I'll go with Trinity here. Pretty big one in the NJAC, Montclair State at Stockton. Montclair State is a 5-point favorite. Not that big of a line for an undefeated team, but they are on the road, Zach. How do you pick this NJAC contest?
Correct. They are on the road. And so just kind of playing the averages, working under the belief that I don't think Montclair State will actually hit the tournament undefeated. Playing at Stockton is definitely a spot where it would be perfectly understandable for them to take that first loss. And so with 5 points to work with here, give me Stockton.
Okay. Zach, I think Montclair is smelling that number one type ranking in their grasp. I think games like this, they need to put the hammer down. I think that they win this game on the road by more than 5 points. Give me Montclair State in this one. All right, Zach, a big one, non-conference game, D3 Datacast game of the week, Mary Washington at Randolph-Macon. Despite Mary Washington's favorable ranking in the computer, our computer efficiency ratings, they're still 10.5-point underdogs on the road at Randolph-Macon. What do you think about that one?
I think that's a surprisingly big number. Of course, I have famously said on this program before that to my detriment, I've been scared away by some big numbers involving Randolph-Macon that just seem to be a little bit too big. But yet again, here I'm going to go with Mary Washington with the big number involving Randolph-Macon. But yeah, I feel like these are two actually very similar teams. They both are not going to beat themselves. They take care of the ball. Typically are not going to be turning it over, right? But so I think that Mary Washington also being that kind of team. I mean, gosh, this has got to be a single-digit game, right? I can't imagine that this is going to be like my expectation. I mean, maybe it could be. We've seen crazy things. This could be a double-digit Randolph-Macon win, but just my expectation, my baseline expectation is not there. So give me Mary Washington.
Yeah, Zach, for me, it's not that hard. It's just 10.5 points feels too big. I mean, I know Randolph-Macon can execute with the best of them, but Mary Washington's pretty good too. I would be surprised if this is double digits. I could see Randolph-Macon winning, especially at home, but by more than 10.5, that seems like a lot, at least to pick against. Like that's maybe like a 70th, 80th percentile outcome for Randolph-Macon. I think the 50th and lower would favor Mary Washington there. All right, that's the picks.
Let's finish up with a mailbag. First one here from One on One Basketball Inc. at One on One Basketball on X. Wash U jumped 15 spots in NPI with win over number one Emory. Given quality win bonus and your projections, what are their odds for Pool C now? To help us all better understand NPI, what spot would they have been in had they lost to Emory? And their odds for Pool C had they lost?
Yeah, I think if they need the pool C, I think they're getting close to 96% right now, or at least they were on Sunday, and then they won on Sunday, right? So I think those odds are getting better. So they were number 21 entering Sunday at 32.32 NPI. If they had lost that Emory game, they would have been number 37 at 60.315. I said 32.3. I think that was 62.3. So yeah, they gained about 2 points of NPI. I think if you want a rule of thumb for any team in the country, this is just quick rule of thumb, and you say what would have happened if we would have won this game or lost this game. I think a win is worth 25 points divided by how many games you've played, or at least how many games are counted in NPI. So for Wash U, that's like 25 divided by 17 right now. That gets them about the number of points that would have changed in their NPI. If it was a win against like Emory that you're talking about, there's a quality win bonus in there. So 25, so maybe make it 30 out of 17, and then that's add or subtract that number, and that's about a win over Emory. That's if you're just looking for like a really quick, what if this game would have changed results? Where would we be in the rankings? You can kind of figure that out, and that's because the winning percentage is 25%, and the strength of schedule is 75%. So 25 points divided by the number of games you've played is about one win in men's basketball NPI.
Next one from Casey Krupka at Casey Krupka on x.com. Is there any team that can lose the rest of the way and still grab a bid already? Matt, I like this. I saw this one come through. And of course, we've, on our bubble watch, we've got the locks and near locks. And as we have explained that in the past, that doesn't necessarily mean that team can just lose the rest of their games, right? But it's kind of within reason them performing the rest of the way like the computer thinks that they should or would expect them to perform, right? But we're now getting to the point late enough in the season. Are there any teams that could actually just lose out and still be safe or fairly safe for the tournament?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question. It's a little bit difficult for me to get the exact answer, but I think if I was reading my computer correctly, I think it was telling me on Sunday that Chicago and Tufts are already there. Maybe also Trinity, Mary Washington, and Emory. There weren't enough scenarios for those teams losing enough games for me to figure out if that they are still safe in like lose out scenarios. But every scenario that existed in the computer, in the last batch of simulations, they were still at 100%. So those teams could be there as well. Other teams are very close. Like maybe even Randolph-Macon is pretty close. But again, like even given their schedule, there weren't simulations in which they lost enough games to completely tell that. But I think we're at maybe 5-6 teams that are probably in that range right now.
And that'll only increase as we go week by week here, I'm sure.
Yep.
All right, one more to wrap up this week's mailbag from Graham Dunwoody at Graham D. Casts on x.com. How should the minimum wins column in your NCAA tournament projections be interpreted? I.e., telling apart the number of games a team needs to win to feel good about a tournament berth versus the team having long shot odds in one or two simulations with that win total. Of course, Graham referencing some of the information that's available in those NPI projections based on the simulations at d3datacast.com. So, Matt, a little bit more explanation there, because there are a couple columns there that give some insight into the results of those simulations that list an average number of wins and minimum number of wins. And those are based on what actually occurs within that run of simulations.
Yeah. So the minimum is just what was the lowest number of wins that they had in any simulation that gave them a pool C berth, an at-large berth. So that could have been 1 out of 1,000 that got them there. So that's how low do we need to be to have even a prayer of getting in. But you wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable at that mark. You'd probably feel very uncomfortable at that mark. It's probably, only a couple percentage odds. So that's the way to think about it. It's not, you would not feel good about that at all. There's the next column I give for most teams about the average wins. I think that's maybe a better number. If you're above your average wins, then that's where you start to feel a little bit more comfortable. So if your average was 20.5 and your minimum was 20, then you're probably looking at, well, we really want to be at least 21, if not 22, to get in, to feel good about being in the tournament.
Good stuff. Another great mailbag. If you have something for us to address at the end of next week's show, you can leave it as a message on this episode on YouTube, or you can find us on social medias at D3 Datacast. We'd love to address any topic that you have for us in a future mailbag. One last thing to do before we get out of here, as we do each week, Matt, we need to say thank you to our great group of supporters who support us financially through the Patreon platform at patreon.com/D3Datacast. Bring you this show, bring you all the information, the current NPI, the projections, the bubble watch, the team efficiency ratings, all that's available without paywalls, without ads at d3datacast.com, because that's what we've chosen to do. And these people have chosen to partner with us in that effort to make everything available to everyone in the Division III basketball community. And all those resources on d3datacast.com apply equally for men's and women's basketball. So go check it out if you have any interest in kind of the developing national picture, especially as we head towards tournament time.
Yeah, we've been running a lot of that projection data all season long, simulation data, but this is where it gets really real these last kind of 4 weeks of the season, especially as we get toward conference championships. That's when you can really see the scenarios of what happens if we win or lose the next game. So fun time of the year, and all that stuff's available on d3datacast.com ad-free. Thanks to these Patreon subscribers. So if you'd like to join, go to patreon.com/D3Datacast. There's a $3 and a $5 a month tier. Pick whichever one you'd like, and that'd be just great. And we enjoy creating this content, a lot of fun stuff as we get towards the tournament, into the tournament. Zach will be here every week. But for now, we're going to have to sign off and say, good job, team.